Appreciate it, Darrin. Thank you. Thank you. One of the companies I worked at, it's called Diageo, not Diageo, but interesting because that was one of the funnest companies I worked at because it was a combination, a merger of Grand Met merging with Guinness to create Diageo. So if you're at a bar, all those top shelf liquors are likely Diageo brands, and it was very interesting to work on the mergers with Guinness at that time. So yeah, I've been at Fortinet for coming up on 4 years, and some of you may know me prior days. I was at Cisco for about 20 years, and got to see a lot of the ways different manufacturers do things. Regarding these lights, I made a comment earlier. I feel like I should be taking out my driver's license and registration. So must have been speeding. Let's make sure this works. All right. So what we're going to talk about is transforming the hybrid workforce. So VPNs. Fun fact, it was about to the day 17 years ago. I was doing a presentation, one of the largest groups I ever had, over 300 people, right? A little bit nervous and everything, but guess what the technology was? It was on transforming VPN away from IPsec VPNs to SSL VPNs. Here I am today talking about the next transformation, 17 years later, but it's around how we transform those remote user experiences, connections, and also, those same users tend to go into the office and making sure that we don't have inconsistent security policies. So that's the subject of the session, and certainly welcome any questions. We'll hold a lot of those to the end, but during, if you got a burning question, feel free to raise your hand. So current technology requires transformation. What are we talking about when I say current technology? It's VPNs, right? Remote access VPNs. You could have remote users, you could have people sitting at coffee shops. Doesn't quite work the greatest. And there's several problems inherent with that, and it's not, there we go. One of the problems, direct internet access is not secure. No surprise there, right? If you're in your home office, like I home office all the time. I don't have an office to go to. And I VPN in. Now, what you want, if I'm just drawing directly to the internet, everybody knows it's secure. If I VPN in, I provide username and password. A lot of times that's enough, you're on, green light. There's no further verdicts to be rendered as far as what you can access. Inherent security risk. Then people added multi-factor authentication. Your cyber insurance companies will certainly be talking to you about that. It does make it more secure. But then there's these BYOD devices that, the posture, it's not just who's connecting, but it's what's connecting. Might be a secure user on a corporate laptop, but that same user might then be coming in from home personally. You got to have a way to control that, block it, isolate it, segment that off from the rest of the network. So that's really the transformation, is that just because you remember the username and password doesn't necessarily mean you're secure enough to get on the network. The other thing is low visibility and control for data. IT people, we have a lot of tools to see what's going on in the network, and guess what? They're on-prem tools in a lot of cases. And if I have a hybrid user, whether that's a small office or a work-from-home user, and they're hitting SaaS applications like Salesforce, I may not be in the path, and I might not be able to pull any visibility about what's going on, and certainly not control that data from a data loss perspective. So that's yet again the second challenge, is the lack of visibility when you have a hybrid workforce. Then you get the user experiences challenges. If they're going to go out to the public cloud, do you really want them hairpinning off your corporate internet drains and using that bandwidth when all they're going to do is just reverse, hairpin off that, and go out to a cloud application? That can give you more security if you're putting yourself in line, but it can affect the user experience overall with latency, delays that they don't necessarily have to have, and certainly don't have to have with this transformational technology that we and other vendors are really touting a lot lately. Lastly, implicit access to all applications. A lot of people hear about, east-west, threats moving laterally in your environment. Most people are protecting their environment from the north-south traffic, and they're just assuming east-west is clean because they're inside the walls of the castle. That's not necessarily the case anymore. And it's not even the bad actors that you got to worry about. It's the unwitting actors that, they remember their username and password, and they keep that all up to date, and they follow, all the security awareness training rules, but there still could be something on that device that could spread laterally in your environment as soon as they connect to a VPN, because VPNs, you'll hear when it comes to zero trust as well as with SASE, implicit access is a thing of the past. Just because you knew who you are and you remembered your password and you might have had a hard token for MFA, you still might be that unwitting threat in the environment, and you might be doing it from a non-managed corporate asset. So What it really requires is a different mindset, this zero trust mindset. It's also, you could call it a zero trust architecture, but for this purposes of this discussion, I want to start with just what's that mindset? The mindset is you don't allow network access. It's only granted after identity is authenticated and authorized. This slide, there's a lot of stuff going on behind that word authorized. What that means is the posture and health of your endpoint too. I want to make sure antivirus is running. I want to make sure it's up to date. If it's not, I want to give you a path to remediation before I open the gates, right? So that mindset needs to be there, which is it's always trust but verify, and access is explicitly granted. So think about it as a blacklist, right? Firewalls generally are nothing's going to get through it until you open it up with a policy. Whereas with VPNs, pretty much everything gets through it, and nobody really configures policies because, you know what, they were able to authenticate. So this authorized piece is a very important of any zero trust technology, as well as any SASE offering. And then limiting network access only to necessary applications, right? That's that whole east-west. I kind of liken it to geofencing, where you put geofencing on a firewall, a lot of people know what that is. Don't let Russia or China in because I just don't do business with them, as an example, right? But once they get into the environment, there's no fence. It's wide open pasture, right? With zero trust mindset, it's putting fences. You have to plan those paths and allow that and explicitly grant the user to come in, not just at the firewall, but anywhere they go in the network. It's not a small feat to have happen, but technology has evolved, so has the orchestration, where it's easily managed and mass deployable, no doubt. This is something Gartner really stresses when it comes to zero trust. Mindset is continuously monitor in near real time based on device and user context. Every connection made, we got FortiSASE deploy, within our own environment. Every time I connect to a resource, my client shows me I can get to this server, that server. Let's say there's a list of 10 things, resources I can get to. I have a certificate for each one of those. And if that certificate is revoked, for getting access to this printer, for example, I no longer have access instantaneously, right? So that continuously adjusting, and what I kind of changed the words around a little bit. Instead of grants network access, it's validate network access. Validate who they are, what their health endpoint posture is. Limit network access, put the word explicit allow in there. It's not an implicit allow anymore under a SASE environment from anybody, right? And then continuously adjust, which is, great, your antivirus is running when you connected, but it's not up to date because you haven't been validated again for a week, and so this really is a closed loop. You're constantly running through this cycle with every connection in a SASE world. And after we lay the foundation, just in terms of the mindset and the architecture, we'll definitely get into products and architecture. I think that's, as an engineer, the most important, most interesting thing. But I just want to make sure we all have this, same sort of common understanding of what zero trust is and how it relates to SASE. So zero trust, it's a principle, right? It's that explicit allowed access we talked about. Then you go to architectures. There's different architectures from different companies. SASE is an architecture that a lot of companies try to follow, but then they have their own products in doing so. How many people have a FortiGate firewall in their environment? See a couple of you. The nice thing about FortiGates, it's not, a lot of the things that it does is not licensed. There's some add-on licenses you can get to make SASE even more interesting and available to more users and locations, but really it's all centered around FortiGate firewalls. And they do SD-WAN very well. The unique thing with Fortinet is we do SASE. SASE is a bundle of something called Secure Services Edge, right? So I can get DLP and CASB, and I can get, digital experience monitoring, a lot of different features that a lot of companies will call SSE. What Fortinet adds to it is SD-WAN. The benefits, if you look at SD-WAN, that's usually site-based connectivity, and I've seen thousands of sites in an SD-WAN network, right? And you can do application steering with SD-WAN, you can do QoS, you can do some interesting failover things. It's an overlay mesh kind of environment that can be, these tunnels can be even established on demand in that kind of case, right? What Fortinet does uniquely is we combine our SD-WAN offering with our SASE offering. So what does that mean? Remote users connecting into a SASE POP, that's great. It looks like a secure web gateway, and a lot of people understand what that is. But we can actually build a connection from our POPs to your FortiGates, and now your FortiGates become a POP in our SASE network. And they know when that user connects, what's the closest access point? They can redirect them to there. What is the applications they have access to? Send them there. And although traffic's inspected end-to-end, or traffic is encrypted end-to-end, with our SASE offering, we do full SSL deep packet inspection. It's inherent in the solution. You don't have to set it up on your own firewall. It's just part of what you get. So this is really how SASE and Zero Trust come together. Is SASE is the architecture, SASE is the product, FortiSASE in particular, and then the architecture is Zero Trust. So if I look at, what is SASE? Secure Access Services Edge. If you look on the right column there where you see it's a secure web gateway, firewall as a service, cloud access security broker, and data loss prevention, something called digital experience monitoring, so you can tell network delays and how long is that host delay to that critical web server, and when does anomaly spikes occur, and get a lot of that information. Something called RBI is very interesting, and you may not have heard about it. I bet a lot of people in this room haven't, if anyone, but you will be. Remote browser isolation, I think it's such a transformational technology in and of itself, right? I get an email, it says click here for my boss, and I get a free Thanksgiving turkey. It's a phishing email, it literally happened. And if you click there, bad things can happen to you, right? With remote browser isolation, it's like a Citrix screen scrape kind of experience. When they click here, they don't actually go to the site, they go to a proxy that goes to the site. They're just getting screen rendering, and when you're getting, pixels, there's no threat in that other than maybe being offended by what you see, but it's not going to spread malware or things like that, right? So that's really the basket of what I call in SASE. Some vendors will license those features out specifically. I'll go into our licensing. One license, you get all that. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet, right? So let's go to the next slide, and this is the one where we really get into the architecture, and I just want to make sure there's not a build on that one. Nope. Something happened in the center of this slide that looks a little goofy. Sorry, it's hard to read, but in the center, that circle, that is the as-a-service from Fortinet. That's hosted and managed by Fortinet. That's our SASE cloud providing all of these security features that you kind of saw in the column on the last slide, right? So you get the unified management, CASB, DLP functions, everything like that. All, again, as an all-you-can-eat sort of buffet. It's all of these security services are delivered by FortiOS, which is what runs on our firewalls, which runs on switches, AP, you name it, right? It's also running in the cloud, being our SASE point of presence, our SASE POP. That's a simple depiction, that center circle, of what we have for SASE. That represents over 150 POP locations around the world for people to connect to for faster latency, for maybe it's even certain applications. And it's really unlimited because all you do is buy this connector and it connects our SASE POPs, 150 of them, to your FortiGates. Now we have 151 POPs just for you, right? Because your FortiGates are also getting all those services access rules. You can check all the user policies, endpoint health, everything all in one pane of glass, even with your own FortiGate providing some of those security services and authorization information. We'll talk more specifically about some of the use cases on the right there where I'll just kind of go bottom up a little bit. There's secure private access, and that's, for applications, not everybody's in cloud yet. You got some applications in your data center. So it's called secure private access to be able to take those remote users through a SASE POP, which happens to be yours now, into your data center to access those applications, fenced the whole way through. There's no lateral movement that can happen, right? And it's all encrypted end to end. That's secure private access because you may still have things in a data center. Then you go to secure internet access. That's where it's now you're allowing users out to the internet to be able to do their normal web browsing and non-SaaS type applications. And there's a third use case where it's SaaS access, right? If you want to get to, Salesforce or ServiceNow or something that's cloud delivered. And how we connect those varies a little bit in the use case, and I'll discuss those on the next slide. One thing, everybody wants to look at Gartner recommendations. This is where the laser pointer is needed, because I guarantee you guys can't read this. And my laser pointer stopped. So way up and to the right, Fortinet recognized as a leader in SD-WAN. That's not new. We've been pioneering SD-WAN for a long time. It's all in FortiOS, and you guys got FortiGate firewalls. You don't even have to call up your sales rep to say, I want to start using SD-WAN. What's the SKU, and how much does it cost? You just start doing it, right? Then when you get into Secure Services Edge, as defined by Gartner, we're the ones in the challenger quadrant, the only ones in there. And if you couple that with the way we do our SASE, they're really combined, and we will be going up the chart in here because interesting things we're doing with our FortiClient to make this all happen. So definitely going to be going up the scale in terms of completeness of vision when we have the endpoint, as it is today, analyzed by Gartner. These reports were from July, and we've done some ramping since then. So let's go ahead and start talking about our POPs. I mentioned, I think this slide shows like 150 plus cloud locations. Some are ours, some are partnered with GCP. But what's in these locations, that third blue box where it says FortiStack, you can't buy that. We built it for ourselves, for our POPs. It's a big, big, big FortiGate that's running FortiOS. And then it's virtualized, so there's client instances carved out of that, right? So that's how that all works, and based on where the client's coming in from, based on where they're going to head to, it'll determine sort of how we steer those applications. You don't get involved in all the BGP routing and everything else we set up to do all this, right? You set up a connector, boom, you're part of the bigger POP network for us. So the foundations of FortiSASE. There's a little bit of review, but just, it's running on one operating system, FortiOS. We like it. It's what made Fortinet Fortinet. Unified management plane. Think about, we were just talking with a customer out at the booth, you got management for wireless and wired are separate sometimes. You've got the firewall that's separate sometimes. And you got a SIM solution, a source solution. You got your Windows. There's a lot of stuff to take care of. So much so that even if you get really good at something and you have this lag of what was it? How did I get in there and find that data in the past? Having a unified management plane gives you simplicity and an all-in-one view. I got a CCIE, and I always joke not to bash a competitor, but I can always tell a Cisco engineer because they got 4 putty windows open on their desktop trying to figure out what's going on. And I thought that was just fine until I kind of learned what I didn't know, which is, that unified management is pretty important. It's also one analytics engine, for threat detection, threat hunting, as well as integration with something we call SOC as a service. Ask somebody about that. It's a really, really cool product. Even if most customers can't afford their own SOC. But you can do this for a year, have somebody help you with it, and then roll it out yourself. I always say that's a good way to get into having a dedicated security operations center. And then SASE does, it comes with a unified endpoint client, which is, it does VPN, it does endpoint protection, antivirus, stuff like that. It's a zero trust agent for us. So FortiClient, it's called the unified endpoint right now in FortiClient. Look for something called FortiEndpoint. We're rebranding it because we're adding our FortiNAC, Bradford Networks capability, as well as our VPN technology and SASE and everything into FortiClient, and our EDR product coming soon, all in that one unified client. So, use cases. I think it's good to understand. It's not Fortinet specific when we really get in here. A lot of vendors have to solve these use case challenges, and I'm just going to show you how we solve that, right? Secure internet access for remote users, right? And that's denoted by SIA down there. Just keep in mind, it's really for enabling secure web browsing and protect users from known and unknown threats. And then you upgrade that to something called remote access for private applications, and that's the SPA, Secure Private Access. It's a SKU. All that does is it builds an IPsec tunnel from our FortiSASE POPs to your FortiGate and sort of brings you into the cluster, if you will, okay? And then SaaS control for data I talked a little bit about this, but shadow IT visibility and concerns there, right? When people roll out SaaS apps and your tools don't see it for compliance or monitoring, auditing, that can be a problem. So let's go into each of these use cases. Secure internet access. That could be agentless devices, it could be FortiClient-based devices, or it could be something unique. I think we're the only ones to call it a thin edge or thin branch, you might hear. And I'll talk about what each of those things are. But with secure internet access, we're really just protecting threats using the SASE toolbox, right? That all-you-can-eat buffet of security protection features. Getting deep SSL inspection. Where this gets interesting, there might be a policy you want. I'll let them go to Facebook, but I don't want them to do Facebook Messenger if they're in a part of my network and in a role that they should not be exfiltrating any data, right? That's the nice thing about being able to crack open, man in the middle, if you will, SSL and be able to write policies and permit, deny, and monitor it too. And then all of this is backed by our threat intelligence service, which is called FortiGuard. I say the day you buy a FortiGate, should be this way from any vendor, but that's the dumbest that firewall is ever going to be because it gets threat feeds of what's going on out in the wild internet, right? And it also detects anomalies, hey, you had this much access on port 443 to that server, and all of a sudden it just went nuts, right? And those spikes mean something that should be looked into. So
does it lock it down when it sees a spike?
it can control it. That's outside of SASE. That's what a FortiGate certainly can do. There's a lot of, if you look at some automation stitches that, but keep in mind, there's an upstream device called FortiAnalyzer that you probably want because that's a big data lake of devices that you got to have access to. So a FortiGate with FortiAnalyzer, absolutely, put you in quarantine. Then secure private access. This is with where I said with SD-WAN integration. So actually, let me back up. Well, it'll be addressed on this slide too. We've got agentless, which is web portal based, right? Because you got a contractor, what are they going to do with it? You're going to give them FortiClient, kind of a pain that you have to manage a third party, and the client you have, they probably don't even want it. They want a web portal. We offer that with SASE. And then you get client-based as well as this thin edge that I talked about. This is unique to Fortinet, but I can buy a switch or an AP, and I can have it build a SASE connection out. And the use case we're talking about with thin edge could also be called like for pop-up locations, but I work with public sector a lot, right? And elections, they want to secure them. Trust me, they do. And they have election sites that are pretty temporal, right? They spin up and they spin right back down. But and who knows what they have for connectivity out to some of those locations. So you get a hardware agent is basically what thin edge is, right? I put a little device in front of a user or group of users, up to 50 users behind it. That AP, when you connect it, phones home into the FortiSASE POP, and it's just like you put an enterprise-grade firewall out there. You've got all of the security features, capabilities, inspection, monitoring for pop-up locations. I mean, I've seen it in retail. They'll sell Christmas trees here in a month. You think those pop-ups are temporal? Yeah, I mean, they spin up, spin down, and they still want to secure those environments because who's going to be sitting in the parking lot trying to get further, So that's, with secure private access, though, the use case there, again, is, great, not everything is on the web, right? I've got applications sitting in my data center, and how can I have these remote users go through a POP, get policy, connect to my data center and access those applications? It's one SKU you buy to add onto the firewall. It creates a connector from your firewall into our POP, and there you go. You got access to data center applications. The interesting thing with SD-WAN integration now is I could have a 1,000-site SD-WAN, and I might not have just my data center as my place where I have hosted applications. I might have this other business unit that has their own hosted applications. Do I want to set up all these IPsec tunnels and organize the routing so that those remote access users can get the benefits of SASE with all its security to get to those sites? With SD-WAN integration, you get the secure private access connection to your corporate firewall. that corporate firewall can have an SD-WAN paths internally over your WAN or broadband to hundreds, if not thousands of other locations. And any hosted application, any of those locations is reachable and sort of fenceable, because I gotta explicitly allow that access. So it just means that applications don't always live in one spot. You don't always have everything centralized. So that's the nice thing with the SD-WAN integration is we can find those services. You didn't have to architect it. If you built the SD-WAN network, we just plug SASE into it. Now a remote user knows how to get to those things and has a secure path to do it. And then secure SaaS access, right? This is still, in this case, with secure SaaS, we don't have to go to the data center over that secure private access connection. We just got to go from the FortiSASE POP, that big Fortis stack that those users are all terminating on, and then go somewhere, like let's say it's ServiceNow Cloud, right? This might even be depicted over there. I can still get visibility of that traffic, even though it doesn't go through my data center and all its tools. Why is that? Because FortiOS is collecting all that visibility, and you can use your FortiAnalyzer to pull in a lot of data specific to your environment, even though it's kind of a shared hosted cloud environment, right? Yeah, deep control. This is, again, you can get, it says API-based CASB or inline-based CASB. The difference is there. It's not an either or, it's either or both, right? Inline API-based CASB is more for data loss prevention, has to do with files and modifications. Just because I renamed a file doesn't mean it's still not sensitive, so we'll track that new name and still be able to build access rules so that people can't evade some of your data loss policies and exfiltrate data doing something as simple as that. Inline gives us obviously a lot more granular control in inspecting that data. And then the FortiClient agent that covers all these use cases is really, that's the preferred method for FortiSASE consumption. It gives the best user experience, but again, agentless does work. It's just, it's a little trickier when you don't have the full client giving you a lot of telemetry data. You miss out on that if you don't have an agent telling you everything about where that device is going. Some of the anomaly detection I can no longer see, start quarantining because they don't have an agent, right? So it's preferred but not required. And then the FortiSASE difference. So really it's consistent security policy for those hybrid users. It's flexible deployment because not everything is a site. Sometimes it's a user, sometimes it's one of those pop-up locations, sometimes it's third-party, partner connection. So you need flexible deployment options, and then simple licensing. I've heard, I won't even mention the competitor, but I've heard when you see a bill of materials price quote for SASE from some vendors, it requires a math degree to understand it. We have one license for all features. We don't carve it out to where you're just going nuts, pulling your hair out, trying to understand it, right? So, consistent security, we talked about that, right? Centralized control, you've got one console to view all your users, all of the posture of their endpoint, and even some health information about that endpoint, how it's running and things, because the agent's running on that. So you get that single console for all the reporting, everything. So that's a lot of, you'll hear unified SASE from Fortinet. It's like, what does unified mean? One console, you don't have a bunch, right? One agent, you don't have a bunch. That's unified agent, right? And that's FortiClient. That's where you get, like I said, a lot of the telemetry, digital experience monitoring. What is the network flight time from that user to that application? And you can track it over time historically to see, maybe they've complained it's slow, that's the internet's slow is a famous one. You gotta go dig into that. This gives you a lot of tooling to be able to get there. I should have popped this up before, but with the one agent, great, it's FortiSASE agent, but a unique thing for us that other SASE vendors don't do is that digital experience monitoring, as well as all the endpoint protection, the EPP capabilities, because FortiClient was endpoint protection first. It became a SASE agent now. It's also become a NAC agent recently, and in the near future, it's going to be an EDR agent. You can see you don't want agent sprawl on a desktop. You want one agent performing all these functions. So. Flexible deployment scenario, so thin edge, secure edge. We've already talked a little bit about that, but this is, yeah, some of Some of the font doesn't really show up right, but I apologize for that. Securing smaller locations. So, you know, if you look at it, these are brand new on our price list. I don't even know if Eric, sales rep for Fortinet, has seen this yet, but we have new switches and APs, and a third new unit, which is a switch and an AP combined. You can buy that for those smaller branch sites, and then it'll connect into the FortiSASE POP. It's got the licensing. It will protect all those devices behind it. And you can start as small, you know, it scales up to 16,000 locations. And I'll say it scales up to 20 or 16,000. Those are big differences, right? 20 locations if it's FortiGates doing that connection via a SASE connection with all of the features. But we can even have up to 16,000 FortiGates if we just do an IPsec tunnel. And the big difference, there's something called LAN extension mode with the FortiGates, where now all those devices are addressable. If that's a printer, somebody remotely could connect to it. That's LAN extension mode, and that's using VXLAN technology, which is hard to scale to 16,000. You just can't scale it that far. But if you need to scale it beyond 20 locations, that LAN extension mode, we got too many locations to be able to do that. Then I can just connect it via IPsec with FortiGates, and it's any FortiGate model that you buy supports SASE in that way. So even our lower end ones. And then again, here's the console. What's kind of hard to see from this picture, but I'm building policies. The new thing from this console, a lot of people have probably seen how to build a firewall policy. This merges the user-based policies with the device-based policies. So now when I create a policy, I permit access to service now for Darrin. Maybe I'm working from home. Then I could have another site that says permit access to service now and all these other things if Darrin's happen to being in that office, a different location, right? Same user, but now I have edge device policies layered in with my user policies. It's a new paradigm. You have to add that, right? Because we're basically, I wouldn't say hiding, but we're protecting users behind these thin edge deployments. So we got to have thin edge policies for it. And this shows the third-party branch SD-WAN device, third-party branch routers. That means you can bring, some of those 16,000 connections don't even have to be FortiGates. This architecture can be slow-rolled, right? You might have, I got different devices at different sites, and at my headquarters I have FortiGates, but I don't anywhere else. You know, I got routers, but I want to have a more direct internet path and be able to still secure those sites, no problem. And then simple licensing. So one management, one agent for licensing. This is our standard bundle. So, and I think there's a build for this. Oh, of course, on the next slide, let me back up. This is our standard bundle. It includes all the SASE features, SSE features, as defined by Gartner, right? So the data loss prevention, the firewall as a service, ETNA, that's all part of the standard bundle. And it's user banded, and you'll see it on the next slide. I'll jump to that. So I can buy it for as little as 50 users, and then there's, you know, volume discounts, right? So if you go up 50 to 500, it's a per user cost that's consistent. When you start going up into the 500 or more users, it's a lesser cost per user. Overall, it's still going to be more, right? But you just per user costs go down, so it's kind of that volume discount. And the standard subscription gives you like the Gartner defined secure services edge security features everybody wants to have. And then the advanced and comprehensive do things like that, remote browser isolation. So don't even let a user infect your network. They're just getting pixels and pictures. They're not getting clickable links and everything else in their email. Digital experience monitoring is, hey, I want to make sure I understand the health of client all the way through to server and any delay anomalies in there. And you can kind of read of all the other, dedicated IPs sometimes can be important, especially when you run reports and things like that, and you want to see, which tie a user to an IP address is ultimately what you're doing. Or tie a site to an IP address, versus just some random IPs given to you by a cloud provider, right? So we'll jump into the next one. FortiFlex, this is something not just specific to SASE, but Fortinet. I like this, especially in public sector, and I liken it to a sort of an enterprise agreement, but not as locking, right? You prepay for points, and then you use those points toward, I want a virtual firewall today in a cloud provider. And I'm gonna spin it up, and I'm only gonna let it run for 2 days, and I got a 365-day license. You can do that. You'll have 363 days left, afterwards, and it's sort of pay-as-you-go model for FortiFlex. That's for our firewalls, that's for FortiSASE, lots of things, ZTNA architecture, so. That's also something to consider along with how we do licensing. And then why FortiSASE? These are just kind of things I want to leave you with that, top 5 things to remember. Fortinet pioneered SD-WAN as a feature of FortiOS, right? I worked back in the days on Cisco when they called it DMVPN. I actually was very deep in the development of that. I thought it was so cool. IWAN, and then that evolved into SD-WAN, and there's at least 3 management consoles just to even deploy the damn thing, right? We have a really good story with FortiGates, our SD-WAN, and the orchestration that goes with it. So we've also expanded our FortiSASE POPs, from 20 up to 150 different worldwide locations. Rapid monthly release cycle, it's cloud software, right? We do minor updates monthly and major updates quarterly to give you new features. Most recent new feature that was a major update, remote browser isolation, distributed digital experience monitoring, FortiManager integration. So now I don't even need to go to the console in the cloud. I can just do this all via FortiManager. Then, I talked about SD-WAN customers can onboard FortiSASE in minutes, right? Because you've already got all your SD-WAN network built out. You don't have to tell FortiSASE POPs about those thousands of sites that are interconnected to SD-WAN. You just have to tell about one. It taps in for that one hub site, and now it can access all those other remotes and the applications wherever they live. So, and unified agent, again, FortiClient enables real-time ZTNA enforcement. It's going to have EDR capabilities added soon. Definitely something to look at. So, just kind of running just the last couple slides here, but unified, seamless SD-WAN integration. So it's unified, consistent, and strong security. Our efficacy is awesome, and I mean, if you know Fortinet, we're very focused on cost and total cost of ownership. And FortiSASE is no different there, the way we've priced it. So that's all I had for the prepared slides. We've got a few minutes here. You guys got any questions, or go for it, gladly.
So your FortiClient, is that any limitations on processors or OS that runs on?
Mac, Windows, Linux. It runs on iOS for iPhones, Androids. Okay. So not many limitations. FortiClient itself has a lot of features, and I will say Apple has locked down the operating system, so we're subject to that, just like a lot of other vendors. So we can hook a kernel at very low level on a Windows system. Apple just sort of takes that away from vendors a little bit more. So there's still security controls, but I wouldn't say they're uniform across operating systems just because of the way Macs can be locked down.
Okay.
Particularly the M1 chips.
What about, do you do any file server auditing or file access auditing? So we can see what clients access, what files on the server, when and where, Windows logons, stuff like that. Does it log any of that?
So FortiAnalyzer is our log aggregator and threat hunting. It does correlation, so not all logs are bad, right? It just can bubble up and tell you what's really bad. Yeah. One of the best values you can get FortiAnalyzer, send your Windows logs. Those Windows logs have who logged in, so much information about what they did. Yes, it does have that, but it's not SASE giving it to you, it's FortiAnalyzer.
If you're a FortiGate firewall customer, typically you'd have FortiAnalyzer. And I say that because about 85 to 90% of our firewall customers have it. FortiAnalyzer is extremely inexpensive. It's not expensive at all. It provides outbreak detection service.
It's free. It's free for $1 a day for up to 3 devices.
Indicators of compromise, and there's automation stitches. It takes all that firewall stuff and puts it into logical information, usable information that is helpful from a security perspective. So if you are a FortiGate firewall customer, strongly recommend you would take a look at FortiAnalyzer. Like again, it's free for the first gig a day, but
Yep.
a lot of the information that's coming in there, you can feed it. You can also feed other manufactured security. So if you're doing EDR and maybe you're using CrowdStrike or another competitor, you can feed that information into it, deciphers it. There's a lot that you can do with that. Again, it's a pretty inexpensive piece that, well, a lot of people go, oh yeah, I have your firewall. I never touch those things. It would work, you know. It's like, well, great. Analyze will provide you a lot more stuff that you might want to take a look at.
And even if you do buy the bigger, more log ingestion rate and everything, and log retention, you know, it's all sizing, goes up pretty large. You can have a payback period that's super small if you're a Splunk customer, because the amount of events per second you pay for in that to ingest it, pre-filtering is a really good idea. FortiAnalyzer, I've had people even say, use Kiwi syslog or something. You don't need to send everything to Splunk, right? You're paying for it when you do. So. Any other questions? All right, well, I really appreciate the time. And I'll be around for a little bit here if you guys want to have any other follow-ups that you just didn't get a chance to ask. So thanks a lot.